Dear guests and participants, welcome and good afternoon to our international conference on European and Israeli cooperation on urban resilience in an era of climate change. My name is Ra'anan Eliaz, and I am founder of Europe-Israel Network, an organization dedicated to strengthening civil cooperation between Europe and Israel. I'm here joined by Yael Cohen-Paran. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting.
Yael is co-chair of the Green Movement in Israel and a former member of Knesset and a strong activist in the field of the environment. Protecting our precious and only planet from ourselves, really, is the reason we are holding this event here today. We are holding this event in partnership with the Hans Seidel Foundation of Germany. Its representative in Israel, Julia Obermeier, and us have dealt with a variety of issues, bringing closer Europe and Israel, and dealing with issues such as gender equality, education, and now the environment. Our audience in Europe and in Israel, please be aware you can switch languages between German and English on the bottom of your Zoom screen. I also wish to thank, in addition to the Hans Seidel Foundation, the Coalition of Climate Organizations here in Israel, Irgun Chaim Vesviva, an Israeli umbrella organization for the movement, the greener movement. Thank you, Eran Binyamini, and thank you, Nir Giron, in particular, for your partnership, for your good advice in planning this event. We believe that together we are stronger. Europe, the European Union, and the individual member states, and Israel has a lot to offer each other and to do together. We share values, we share interests, we also share the same concerns. And the environment and the environmental crisis is an excellent example for that. We have so much to give to each other. And since our future is bound to be joint, we are here working to make it a better one. Climate change, specifically, according to established research, is becoming and will be by 2040 the major threat to human development and well-being, not only in the Mediterranean, but globally. Adding to this the fact that more and more people are moving to live in cities, the figure in Israel right now is that 92% of Israelis are living in urban areas. We must ensure urban development is sustainable and cities remain green and safe. We will begin the event today by interviewing the EU ambassador in Israel, Mr. Emmanuel Jouffret, and the ambassador Gideon Bahar, a special envoy for climate change from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Israel. Later, we will hold a live panel discussion, which Yael and I will moderate together. We are celebrating Europe Day this month, and we are delighted to have Ambassador Emmanuel Jouffret with us as our first guest speaker. Ambassador Emmanuel Jouffret, Head of Mission of the European Union in Israel, thank you for joining us to this event dealing with urban resilience in an era of climate change.
Well, thank you, the Europe-Israeli Network and the Hans Seidel Foundation for organizing this event on a topic which is becoming increasingly important and relevant in Europe and in Israel.
You served as Deputy Head of Mission. I think we met in early 2004. And then you came back as head of mission. So you know Israel quite well, and you care for Israel and its relationship with the European Union. Through the prism of the environment, can you describe us this alliance?
Ranan, you're right. I've been in Israel for a long time. I arrived the first time in 2003 for 4 years, and I left for other assignment, and I came back in 2017. So I have a longer perspective than some of my colleagues. And I have to say that certainly the EU-Israeli relations is very peculiar in the sense that it's adaptable to the emerging challenges. So we've seen in the course of our relationship new item becoming more relevant in our agenda. In the 90s was science and research and technologies, innovation. And I think we've seen that the environment has become a much more central topic in our relationship. Why? Because environment and fight against climate change has become much more relevant, certainly in Europe, and is becoming relevant in Israel. The Mediterranean is suffering a number of climate-related vulnerabilities. It's an area that, of the world which is heavily affected by climate change. We've seen a longer period of heat waves or more repeated heat waves that impact agriculture. We've seen more frequent heavy rains, which produces flood and sometimes even disasters we've seen a couple of years ago in the south of Israel. And we've seen also the level of the sea rising, which is a threat for all the Mediterranean region. And this has become a big issue in Europe, certainly, and has become the priority in Europe. And this has produced what we call the European Green Deal, which is the European response to climate change. Europe has decided to take head-on climate change in the follow-up to the Paris Agreement. We have made a legal commitment. We want now to be climate neutral by 2050 and to reduce by 55% carbon emission by 2030. But of course, Europe is also aware that alone we cannot change climate because Europe is responsible only for about 9% of the global climate emission, carbon emission. So we need to work together with others. And Israel, as one of our main partners in the region, can certainly work with us. And we've seen also in Israel progressively more awareness on the need to tackle climate change. And certainly there are areas in which Israel can contribute by, of course, cutting its own emission, but also, perhaps more importantly, by contributing where Israel is the strongest, which is in the innovation sector, by producing the new technologies that will help us to fight against climate change and reduce CO2 emissions. Israel has a lot to contribute, particularly in certain areas like agriculture in extreme weather, but also in other areas such as stocking energy, and the issue of batteries is certainly crucial to all our work. But there are other areas where certainly in Europe we have made much more progress. All areas of renewable, I think we're much more advanced than in Israel, be it aeolic or solar generated. We have created the financial muscles in order to promote this change of approach in the context of the Green Deal, and the European Investment Bank will increasingly become the Green Bank of Europe and funding mainly those projects. And then we're certainly much more advanced in what we call the circular economy. The plastic strategy, how to reduce plastic, is one of our offspring of the circular economy approach. And we work with the Ministry of Environmental Protection in Israel, for example, in waste management. But there are other areas in which I think Europe can support. Certainly, we need to decarbonize our economy, and we have presented an hydrogen strategy, and hydrogen can become a tool to decarbonize the economy. And then there's the issue of smart mobility. Mobility produces a lot of carbon dioxide, so we need to be much smarter, both in terms of developing electric cars, but also integrated commuting system that reduce the amount of carbon dioxide that we waste. Well, we have a number of very concrete tools. The first one that comes to mind in the context of Israel is, of course, our framework program for research and innovation, which is now called Horizon Europe. Horizon Europe is about 96 billion euros for the next 7 years. to fund innovations in Europe and in our partner countries. Then we've been funding the Covenant of Mayors for the Mediterranean. And here we had about 122 mayors, including about 10 Israeli cities, that have developed what we call sustainable energy access and climate plans through the support via knowledge and capacities of the European Union. And in the future, Climate for Cities, which is to follow up on the Climate Med, and this program will be funded by from 5 to 50% by the European Union budget for the Southern Mediterranean, and we of course aim at bringing and building capacities at the local level, local authority level, in the context of climate change and protecting biodiversity.
Europe-Israel Network is precisely aiming to target and help civil society and municipalities that you mentioned. How to generate awareness and priorities among policymakers and civil society using the mechanisms of the European Union?
Well, certainly civil society and local authority have a key role in promoting and pushing for the fight against climate change. CTF are closer to citizens. They know exactly what citizens need and they communicate much better to them. And this is why the local authority have such a key role in raising awareness among society and generate the necessary support to the change of policies that we now require to fight effectively against climate change.
What about Israeli entities that are based within the 1967 borders but have activities also outside the 67 borders? Can they apply for EU funding?
Well, in the European Union we have very strict rules. We cannot fund any activity that are taking place beyond the 67 line in territory that came under the Israeli administration after the Six-Day War. So these are rules very strict, but we have of course a number of possibilities. For example, we have a program called the Peace Building Initiative that allow for activity taking place across the areas. We work with the civil protection mechanism of Israel, the Palestinians and the Jordanians, for example in the past, to fight against forest fires that have a direct impact on climate change. So we certainly try also to look at possibility to create a regional cooperation in the fight against climate change, in promoting environmental protection and biodiversity that go beyond the 67 lines.
Ambassador Joffre, thank you very much for being with us in this event and for your excellent work here in Israel. We are now joined by Ambassador Gidon Bahar, Special Envoy for Climate Change and Sustainability at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs here in Israel. Thank you very much for joining us, Ambassador Bahar.
Thank you very much. Shalom. Guten Tag.
Ambassador, Israel is well known for its innovation and technology. It is also experienced in extreme weather conditions. How does Israel help Europe today, and what can Israel get as help from Europe? Especially if we can discuss the urban sphere and how public diplomacy is being used to mitigate its negative impact.
Okay, there is a lot to be done between the European Union and Israel, and a lot is already being done on professional level by meetings of the ministries relating to the issues like the Ministry of Environmental Protection, with its equivalent in the European Commission, but also bilaterally between Israel and different countries in Europe. Indeed, Israel is strong in what we call climate innovation. These are technologies or ideas and ways that are used both for mitigation to reduce greenhouse gases emissions, but both for adaptation. I can mention water, for instance, agriculture, whether it's urbanic agriculture or precise agriculture or drip irrigation, or other types of irrigation like remote sensing, etc. But also renewable energies like energy storage. There are some very good development in Israel in the field of energy storage, like energy storage in compressed air and other areas, or the development of alternative proteins. Israel is one of the 3 most leading countries in the world in the field of alternative proteins. So we want and we would like to cooperate with Europe in these fields of technology. We both have a lot to learn and a lot to share. The impacts of climate change are so severe, but that we do not have any other option but to cooperate together and to share information. We learn a lot from the European Union, especially in the fields of regulation, the fields of legislation, approaches to environmental issues like circular economy, technologies like hydrogen, as the ambassador has mentioned before. So there is a lot to do together, and I think that we must work together in order to overcome the issues of climate change.
Thank you very much. Emmanuel Joffre, Ambassador Joffre, mentioned quite extensively the mechanisms that the European Union has to support joint projects, R&D and innovation. Coming from the perspective of the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs and being aware of the efforts here in Israel, for example, I mentioned earlier the coalition of environmental organizations that are seeking support. Can you tell us a little bit about what the Ministry of Foreign Affairs can offer these Israelis wishing to work and co-create with their European counterparts?
Okay, this is the bread and butter of our work. Our work is to create bridges and to create possibilities, either for the private sector or for civil society or the environmental movement in Israel. And this is something that we do constantly. We engage experts from the civil society in Israel, especially in fields like climate change and environment. We create for them opportunities to speak, to participate in seminars, in webinars, to contribute. And we would like also to see more exchange between environmental movements in Israel and in Europe and in the world in general. We see the environmental movement in Israel as an asset, a national asset for us to improve international relationship, to create a better good in the world, and to contribute to this huge challenge that we are all facing, which is environmental degradation, loss of a species, climate change, etc., etc. So we do our utmost to encourage the exchange between environmental organizations, both in Israel and in Europe, and we think that they have a very important role to play in the field of climate change and environment.
Thank you so much. You mentioned the very pragmatic help that the ministry offers, and we have picked, and for a good reason, to focus on municipalities and municipal level. Can you please expand on that?
Yes, of course. We also work in that. The municipalities in Israel are crucial, not only in Israel, but in general, municipalities and cities are crucial in the fight against climate change. Cities are a major contributor, first of all, of emissions, but they are also, first of all and foremost, to suffer from the negative effects of climate change. So an approach based on climate change in cities and the urban areas is very much needed in order to mitigate emissions, but also in order to create resilience. And we are working together with the central organization of municipalities in Israel. We create for them opportunities to speak with the OECD, with the European Union. We encourage them to be in contact with other cities. There are programs of twin cities, etc. So we think that this is another channel, very important, of cooperation between Israel and the European Union, a channel that must be received special attention and special aid from governments and also from us, of course, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Israel.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Bahar. It's been a pleasure, and we look forward to working together more.
My pleasure.
Before we move to our panel, let us watch a short video that we've prepared especially for this event, dealing with the German effort that began quite early, several decades ago already, on the green area and a greener world. A special thanks to our partner in Germany, in Bavaria, the German School of Journalism, for preparing this short video.
The Earth as we know it, it is at risk. And the global community must find solutions to save it.
Environmental policy is important because the state of the environment impacts our economic, our social and cultural well-being, and even our security. If you look at climate change, it increases climate-induced natural catastrophes like hurricanes, floods, droughts, with great loss of human lives and even greater economic losses. If you look at degraded forests or land and overfished seas, they can feed less people and they render decreasing profits.
Looking back, around 50 years ago, people in Germany realized that it was important to protect the environment. In 1970, the government in Bavaria introduced its own environment ministry, the first in all of Europe. Responsible at the time, CSU Prime Minister Alfons Goppel.
Environmental problems became visible and apparent. Citizens could see them, they could feel them. If we talk about air pollution in the western part of Germany, for example, in the industrial area, if we talk later than in the 80s about the dying forest due to acid rain, and therefore there was an increasing pressure then to address these problems.
In 1980, a new party was founded in Germany, the Greens. One of its focal points to this day, environmental policy. After that, many other parties also made this issue their own. But for the young people of Fridays for Future, this policy is not moving fast enough. They drive the politicians in Germany before them, mobilize hundreds of thousands. Fridays for Future demonstrates in the streets for more climate protection.
Their call to listen in addition to climate science helped move the discussion from what a climate-friendly transformation of the economy will cost towards a discussion what a climate change-induced transformation will cost for the economy.
Over the years, Germany spends more and more money on environmental protection. At the end of the 1970s, it was around 4 billion euros. In 2018, it's already more than 70 billion euros. For politicians, it's a constant balancing act between economic interests and environmental protection. Also for CSU-Politician Martin Huber.
Es hilft uns nichts, das eine gegen das andere auszuspielen, sondern dass wir eben Umwelt und Wirtschaft gemeinsam denken müssen, dass wir natürlich oftmals auch in der Wirtschaft um das Verständnis werben, manchmal vielleicht auch kämpfen müssen, dass es auf lange Frist sinnvoller ist, die Ressourcen zu schonen, verantwortungsvoll mit der Schöpfung umzugehen.
But how does environmental policy work? 3 examples. Number 1, a success story. In the 1980s, a hole in the ozone layer was detected. The less ozone in the stratosphere, the more solar radiation damages plants, animals, and also humans. In 1987, 24 countries and the European Economic Community then adopted the Montreal Protocol. Certain substances that destroy the ozone layer could no longer be used or should be used less. The result: the ozone layer was able to recover. Example 2, agriculture. In Germany, but also in other countries, agriculture is becoming more and more technological. Fertilizers release nutrients into the soil. If more fertilizer is applied than the soil can absorb, these substances end up in the groundwater and later in the oceans. There, they lead to more algae growth and dead zones, such as in the North Sea. German and European policymakers therefore have a fertilizer ordinance to ensure that not too much fertilizer gets into the soil. Among farmers, however, this regulation is very controversial. And probably the most prominent example at present, climate change. The problem is global, and there is not one technological solution, but many different things that need to be addressed. Energy, buildings, transportation, industry and agriculture all need to be transformed to reduce greenhouse gases, similar to the ozone hole, but in a much more complex way. But how can these problems be tackled in the future? More international cooperation is needed, says expert Jan-Peter Schemmel.
But we don't need to shift so much the direction of the policies, but we need to lift the level of ambition of the implementation. What we need is the courage to follow scientific advice and to speak up and represent also the young and the future generations.
Wow, thank you. And thank you for the School of Journalists that prepared this for us. And I think we all know that climate change is really the biggest challenges that we as humanity are facing these days. And we in Israel, I think, well, me as an Israeli, I think Israel is not doing enough, and it's maybe just following what is happening in the world. And most of the times, it is, I don't think there is the leadership for moving forward with serious actions. And unfortunately, we see what happens in crisis, like we have just, Israel is coming out of the coronavirus crisis. Unfortunately, the rest of the world is still not see the end of it, but we can see that in a crisis, we can make very, very big changes. And another thing we see in the crisis that the cities and the municipal framework is crucial for people's life. And I think that the connection to climate change is immediate, because climate change is not just, you know, a catastrophe that is waiting to happen in 100 years. It is already happening. And we see the need to see how we can focus on making serious action and taking serious action on all levels, on individual levels, on the municipality levels, on the community level, and of course on the international and national levels. And we are now going to start a panel that is focusing, of course, on the urban resilience. And this is about to see what municipalities can do and what can we do in Israel and in Europe to cooperate better to make this change that is so needed. And we all need to cooperate to make this happen and to take serious action, much more serious action. As all scientists tell us, we have to act in these next 10 years. By 2030, we have to curtail the growth of climate change emissions, greenhouse gas emissions that cause climate change. And we are now going to begin with the very distinguished panelists that are joining us today. Professor Yoav Yair, the Dean of the School of Sustainability in the Interdisciplinary Center, Herzliya. Mr. Sebastian Kreisel, the Chairman of the Local Council of München-Freiheim. I hope I said this correctly. And Mr. Eitan Ben-Ami, the Director of the Environmental and Sustainability Authority, Tel Aviv-Yafo Municipality. So we are going to start with each making a short presentation, and following that, a panel discussion. And I encourage all of you coming here today with us to ask questions. You have the chat, and we will follow on your questions and ask them to the panelists. So please, Professor Yoav Yair, I would like to hear you. What is you're going to present the overall perception of how we are facing, what we are facing, please.
Okay, so thank you for inviting me and letting me speak. I'm going to do it really briefly because you only gave me less than 5 minutes. So
5
we're
minutes,
talking
go
about, yeah, we're talking about resilience and policy making. And I'm going to talk a little bit about climate science because I want us all to be on the same page. Some of us are probably there, but let me just give you the numbers because facts are important. And the facts are that we are getting warmer. 2020 was the second warmest year on record. This is what we call in climate science the new normal. And by the way, climate warming is not equal on everywhere around the planet. Some areas get warmer more than others, while others may get cooler, as we can see from this map that shows how last year was. And I already have seen the forecast by the ECMWF, European Center for Mid-Range Weather Forecast. It's going to be a hellish summer for us, so brace yourselves. And if you look at a decadal point kind of data presentation, then the colors show by how much degrees per decade. So for this period, you can multiply by 3, and you can see that Central Europe, Egypt, and the Levant, and the Middle East have warmed considerably faster compared with the rest of the planet. And actually, we know that the Mediterranean basin is a climate change hotspot, as Ambassador Bahar had correctly pointed out before. And we have some conspicuous, very clearly visible implications. For example, the disappearance in summer of the northern ice cap and the diminishing size that goes on. And the slow, so this is another way to depict it. We lost already 40% of summer ice in the North Pole, and sea level rise is still going at least now at 3.2 millimeters per year, but this is a rather conservative estimate based on what we measured before from satellites and from buoys, but it's going to get worse, and it's not going to slow down because we have two effects, and one is melting of land ice, and the other is just expansion, thermal expansion of the water. And as was correctly pointed out by previous speakers, we see definitely a rise in climate-related natural disasters, not only in Europe, but all through the world. This is a diagram from the Munich Re report of 2018, and you can see clearly that climatic events, hydrological events, and meteorological events, such as extremes, fires, droughts, of course, biological invasions of pests and viruses are on the rise. And as I said before, the green line shows the planet, the blue line shows the Mediterranean basin from Portugal until Baghdad. And this is extremely visible cities. These are from some major cities in Israel. You can see how slowly but surely urban areas in Israel are growing warmer. Tel Aviv, Beersheba, Jerusalem are hotter compared to their rural surroundings. Droughts are becoming more prevalent. This is the PDSI, Palmer Drought Severity Index in the Mediterranean Basin and Southern Europe, Spain, Southern France, Corsica, Greece, Turkey, and of course the Levant, severely impacted by droughts, diminishing rain, warmer temperature, more evaporation. And so this is the present. What's the future? Depends on what we do. As Yael was pointing out, we need to take action, and not a day sooner. And depends on the emission scenarios that our economies will actually follow. That dictates probably the trend in warming. And so, sum up in my last minute, we'll see continued warming. We'll definitely see sea level rise, which will affect ocean currents and weather patterns. We will see intensification of tropical storms. We already see some unique and bizarre storms in the Mediterranean, which we haven't seen before. We call them Medicanes, Mediterranean hurricanes. God forbid that we have them in the frequency that is already observed in the Atlantic. So yes, droughts, desertification, we can expect in Southern Europe. Sea level rise, as I said, will affect major cities, harbors in the Mediterranean. As noted before, severe flooding events, dust storms more prevalent, forest fires, major hazard in Europe, but also in the Middle East. And to sum up, I would just say the last bullet. natural disasters will increase. The trend is unlikely to reverse. Thank you.
Thank you for a very, very concise and brief overall look. I mean, you did it in 5 minutes or even less, and this is very, very well done. And I think, well, I think anyone, I think in the Zoom meeting is aware of the situation, but I think you highlighted very serious facts that even I wasn't aware that Central Europe was one of the hitting, like one of the hotspots of the world. It's I think it's relatively new information, at least for me, and I'm sure Germans. The next speaker is from Munich, from Freiheim, Mr. Sebastian Kreisel. And before he will speak, we will start with a short movie, and I'm sure he can tell us about the heat waves they are suffering from in Germany lately. So Mr. Sebastian Kreisel is just, as I said before, but I will repeat, he's the chairman of the local council of München. Please, Mr. Sebastian, to you.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and greetings from Munich. I'm talking from the district of Freiheim. I'd like to greet you from Freiheim. I present you a new district, the outskirts, extreme western outskirts of the city of Munich. And the aim here is a sustainable urban development that meets economic, ecological, and social requirements all at the same time. It's an inclusive district concentrated for 30,000 people, and it offers up to 50,000 jobs. All of this on an area of just 350 hectares. The construction has started in 2015. The district shall grow gradually, and it is to be completed until 2040. The film, we saw the origin, that is the agricultural estate of Freiheim, which lent its name to the district. It was first mentioned in a document in the 13th century. It will remain surrounded by an open, spacious grazing area. And this figure ground plan shows Freiheim and the structure on construction of this district. In the upper colorful part is the residential area, and in the lower part is the industrial area with bold structures. To the west, on the left, is the estate Freiheim, which lent its name to the district. We will continue to build this area. The residential buildings are all arranged in blocks around inner courtyards. A large community will be created. The courtyard is used for communication, relaxation, and leisure. Short distances are also part of the overall concept. A mobility concept will make the car dispensable within the district. And we have a power plant for geothermal heating of the whole area. The district is connected to a variety of networks. A fixed requirement is greening and use of roofs. These will be available to the residents for all the people in the area. There are lots of public spaces, play areas, and open spaces. The film has showed us, and there are additional play areas in the inner courtyards. They are accessible to everybody, and it's forbidden to close them off. There must also be spaces for residents so that they can network. A positive example is an open-air supermarket where people can buy locally grown vegetables and produce from local farmers. And the networking of the various actors, such as local politicians, city administration, builders, and town planners, is a central task. And this is an enrichment for all of us. Freiheim is just emerging. It's a green district. At the time, there are only 1,000 people living there, and I'm very pleased that I can accompany the development over the years and decades until the district will be completed in 2040. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kreisel, and I think we wish to see a plan like this anywhere in Israel. And this is what we certainly have a lot to learn from what's happening in Europe, and I think especially in Germany. And I said before that I don't see leadership on the national level in Israel on these issues, unfortunately. But I do see it on local level. And I think that some cities are leading, taking action and making serious commitments to reducing climate change, to combating climate change, and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And I think one of the leaders of it is certainly the city of Tel Aviv. And we are happy to have Mr. Eitan Ben-Ami, the director of the Environmental and Sustainability Authority in Tel Aviv Municipality, Tel Aviv-Yafo Municipality. So Eitan, please to you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. I will definitely show a case of a municipality that moves forward without sometimes the support of the national government, but as I learned, many cities around the world are doing the same, and they're not waiting for the governments to do the job for them. So we took the leadership. The first slide shows a few details about Tel Aviv for people that are not familiar. When they talked before about 92% populated areas in Israel, I think that we represent the peak of this percentage. We are 420,000 residents, going to more than 5,000 in the very near future. And you can see the details over here. We were lucky to be chosen to be part of the C40 network. And due to their help, we got guidance, we got support, professional support to actually write a climate adaptation plan that we have to fulfill the implementation until 2030, as been said before. We already have the plan in place. We have right now 84 missions to 16 different departments in the municipality. We have a person that is following up on each one of them. They're in the DNA of the organization, and we're moving forward. I think that the main challenges were to get the different units in the municipality to talk the same language of climate change, to understand that no one can do it by itself. It has to be a mutual effort of different departments, starting with the planning, that was very important to install in the beginning all the basic needs to build a city that can live while the climate change and the coordination. And we have here the timeline to do so. We have two major problems and challenges that we decided to combat at the beginning. One of them on the left side is the heat islands in the city. We did a program together with Columbia University and NASA to project the heat in Tel Aviv. And actually, they did a very interesting thing, and they also had the map of the socio-economic situation of the residents of Tel Aviv. And then we were able to see where the climate change is going to affect people in a more severe way. And we highlight these neighborhoods and we start to work there in order to make sure that the heat waves won't affect them so much. The second map that you can see, talking about floods, we had a few major flood cases here in the city in the last 2 or 3 years. So we put the map, and we're working both to increase the capacity of the underground irrigation to take the water away, but we also work to put some new rooftops that will be able to delay the water from entering the public areas, and also working with the community to try and change the private gardens that they have in order for them to keep the water in their territory as much as they can and prevent the flooding outside. Talking about the fact that climate change affects now and not just for the future, we took this map from one of our departments that deal with irrigation, and you can see very clearly, I think that it shocked many people, such a simple graph that we used to irrigate 6 months in 2004, 5, and 6, and 2017 and 2018, it was over 10 months. And people don't pay attention for that because it's not a figure that people are looking at, but after we showed this graph and many others, people understood that it affects us now and not our grandchildren. We divided these two missions to the different departments in the municipality. Each one have his own, I will show you in a second. We have what we call a mission card. On the left side, you can see the card, which tells exactly who's in charge, who are the people that are the departments that needs to work with them, what's the timeline, et cetera. On the right side, you can see it's another picture that we were able to convince people that something needs to happen. There is a renewal in the city of all the homes from the 50s, 60s are knocked down, and you build the new buildings. Now what happened, look at the left side, this is the older city, and the right side is how, if we don't stop the phenomena, the city will look in 10, 20 years. So now we have new plans. For example, when you build now a new home like that, the underground, the parking lot or whatever you build them, has to be 2 meters away from the walkway. So in that 2 meter, you will able to plant trees that will have enough ground to grow and to shade the area. So we won't see these streets in the city anymore. I must say that this program was initiative of many professionals in the municipality. Together with the management, we're able to bring everybody together, and hopefully we're on the right track to combat the climate change here in the city. Thank you so much.
Very interesting, even to see how many water you needed to irrigate. If I remember correctly, 2017 and 18 were years of drought. Actually, we had 5 years of drought in a sequence that was really not normal, and everybody agreed that it's related to climate change. Correct me if I'm wrong, Yoav.
No, absolutely correct. Last time it was in 1922. That was the previous time.
And even the water authority, only at the end of it, like the end of 2018, started the ministry of water, then it was called the Water and Energy, started to campaign for people to save water, but it took them 5 years to realize that we need to campaign to save water. We are in a country that water is a scarce
resource.
resource, yes, sorry. So we will start asking questions, and if you have any questions in the chat, just feel free to raise them up. And I will begin with asking you both from the municipalities, Sebastian and Eitan, what do you think we need to do to make better cooperation between cities and municipalities in Europe and Israel, in Germany and Israel, in order to cooperate, in order to really learn from each other and do projects together? I think Germany has a lot to take from Israel when it's very hot now in Germany. Israel knows how to deal with that, and of course Israel has so much to learn from how Germany implemented very high efficiency, both energy efficiency and renewable energy on the rooftops, whereas in Germany you have half the energy, half the sun we have in Israel, and half the energy from the sun. They still have a lot more electricity than we can dream of coming from the sun. So how can we learn and really cooperate to make this happen in a better way? And I'm sorry, Yoav, you will have questions in a minute. Maybe Sebastian, you want to start?
Vielen Dank. Ich glaube, wir müssen uns mehr anschauen, was auf der anderen Seite getan wird. Best Practices untereinander austauschen. Wir versuchen gerade bei uns in den Neubaugebieten Bäume dort zu pflanzen, wo keine Tiefgaragen sind. Sinnvolle Bewässerung, Dachbewässerung zu nutzen, dass die auch vor Ort versickert. Wir wollen die Fernkälte nutzen, um Räume zu kühlen, und Fernwärme, um Räume zu heizen. Wir brauchen hier nachhaltige Produkte, um eben auch unseren Beitrag für einen oder gegen einen Klimawandel zu leisten. Und da müssen wir unsere Best Practices vergleichen. Dafür brauchen wir Unterstützungen. Die Kommunen sind Vorreiter und die Regierungen müssen uns hier zusammenbringen.
Thank you. Eitan?
I think that, especially in Israel, I don't know exactly how the system works in Germany, but I think the government needs to realize that cities and municipalities are the ones that can implement the missions. And it's not that the government has to do everything. They have to guide. They have to do some infrastructure things that only government can do. But the implementation lies within the municipalities. For example, if they give us a good price to install PVs on roof and to use the sun, the energy of the sun, then municipality take the challenge and they do it. Like we invested now almost 40 million shekel to install PVs on every public building in Tel Aviv because it was worth economically. Nobody will do it if he doesn't get the return in, I don't know, 10 years. If it will be 25 years, nobody will invest. So that's what the government is. She needs to allow the municipalities to do the work and to give us the infrastructure for that and the guidance for that. So I think that if they will realize it, I'm not sure that they did it already, then we'll be able to move forward. And other cities that wants to do it, but they don't have the financial strengths like Tel Aviv maybe to move forward. They need support.
Thank you. Yoav, what about cooperation with the European academic institutions? Look, in Israel, there are very few. I think your in a IDC in Herzliya is one of the leading school for sustainability. And in others, there is also the Porter School in Tel Aviv University, but in other universities, they're only beginning to realize it's an important issue and starting to open departments. And I think this is really a big question, why the academy in Israel is not dealing with this issue in much bigger urgency and taking, you know, the leadership on that. And what can we also learn and cooperate better with Europe on this issue, on academic relations and building bridges for students to go to Europe and bring in the knowledge by studying there, by sharing the knowledge here when they are back here. This will, you know, create a lot of influence.
Well, let me say this. First of all, there is an awakening suddenly in the last couple of weeks 3 major universities have established climate change programs. First, Ben Gurion University of the Negev had said that they're going to start teaching sustainability and climate change in all 3 degrees, like undergrad, master's, and PhD program, like an over campus kind of an umbrella study program, which is really inspiring because they rely on their already existing expertise in desert studies, in water and remote sensing. So Tel Aviv was soon to follow, and the head of the Porter School, which is now Professor Price, will probably lead the new Climate Change Center that is going to be opened in October at Tel Aviv University. And the same goes for the Weizmann Institute and the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. So everyone is jumping now with a more, I would say, pronounced, visible mode of research, collaborative research, interdisciplinary research within the universities, and of course, in collaboration with European universities and American and Japanese, wherever the problem is felt to be more urgent. So I think there is now a great momentum in the Israeli academia to reach out for European partners. I know that we already have submitted several results through ESERD to the open calls of the EU in the Horizon program. And we already did that in the past in FP6 and FP7. And we had some very good collaborative research projects in the Mediterranean basin and in Southern Europe. So yes, academia is already working for a couple of years, but on the, I would say, climatic, physical, geographical aspects of climate change. What is new now is this integration of policy and economics into the game. And I think as the ambassador said in his opening comments, the EU Horizon program really puts a lot of emphasis on this topic of climate change, climate resilience, cities becoming net zero. I think this is one of the major challenges facing large urban metropolitan areas such as the Tel Aviv city. And I think this is the most urgent thing that academia and municipalities, with the help of funding agencies, can actually achieve in a very quick turnaround time. So I don't need to calculate the ROI on installing PVs on a certain building when we know that if you plant trees in a city, it will reduce the temperature of the city, it will absorb pollutants and make everybody's life more nice. So yes, this interweaving academic knowledge with practical advice and urban policies, this is the way forward. And this is actually what we are starting to do and to see. So I'm absolutely optimistic about the directions, and that's the way forward.
Thank you very much. I encourage the audience to add questions. In the meantime, I will add my own, and this is an open question to all the participants. You mentioned Horizon Europe, the ambassador of the European Union mentioned the European Green Deal. There is really a huge amount of money and a huge opportunity. Are the Israelis, are the Europeans taking full advantage of the ability to work together, to join hands, and to use this investment quickly and in the best way?
I can say that yesterday I got a negative response for a proposal that we've submitted together with the University of Barcelona, University of Bucharest, and I think there were 12 or 14 entities in that consortium of Israeli, the Green Movement with Hagit Geffen, I'm sure you know her. So we submitted a joint proposal. We named it the Green Deal Landscape, but we didn't get the grade, so we were not funded, but we will try again. So, in academia, we already know how to collaborate with European partners. We've been doing this for ages, but now that there are specific targets with really quantifiable and measurable parameters that we want to achieve, I think it will facilitate more robust collaborations, especially when you bring in SMEs and cities. Okay, and I think that in the next round, we will try again, hopefully with better success. But yes, we are going out because the urgency. the agency is quite clear to everyone.
You said it, the academia is already there. How are municipalities doing? Eitan, Sebastian.
I must say that we yesterday were rejected too from a consortium that we had, but we
You're
keep
not alone.
yeah, but we keep trying, and it's fine.
Do you feel you are getting the full on trying to get the opportunities to get more cooperation, more consortium built, and like going to new areas that you didn't deal with before? Eitan?
We have these bids coming from different directions all the time. I must say that we have to pick and choose because each one of them is hard work. And after you get 2 or 3 rejections, you ask yourself, do I want to invest in it again? I think they should, or it should be another process where, you know, I don't know, with more certainty what's the odds of receiving it. Because otherwise, if you do it once, twice, 3 times, you don't want to submit it anymore. It's a hard work. So it is a problem. You build a consortium, you sit, you discuss, you write paperwork, you do all these things, and then eventually nothing comes from the pipe. So then we go to our CEO to get the money that we need. You know, that's what we do.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, yeah, you know, in academia, we are used to submitting,
Of course.
being refused, resubmit. In cities, it's a little bit different, but I think the growing realization is that we have a problem. It's a joint problem, and with, you know, collaborative efforts, we can actually tackle this, and it's always by merit. The fact that we and you did not get funded, it means that someone with a better plan probably did get funding. And what's nice about European programs is that everything is then transparent. So you can see what they are doing, learn from their best practice, and maybe adopt and import some stuff to your city without winning a European money. And this comes back to the question of government funding and how to divert municipal money to the urgency of different aspects, from is sea level rise more urgent than urban flooding or heat island effects in Tel Aviv? We need to discuss these, where to tackle first, because not everything is going to happen at the same rate.
It's true.
Sebastian, do you want to comment?
I can completely agree. The municipalities are those who implement the programs, but I cannot implement all programs at once, and I have support the academic approach. I have to prove myself. I have to set preferences. And I can also profit without, I learn much from my neighbors, my partnerships, also from cities from Israel, if I look at their best practice. But that only works if we have the support of the government and we get the funds, because all by ourselves we cannot do it by ourselves. We need the support of the government, and this has to continue to the European level so that we can support it for the advantage of our inhabitants and for the future of the world.
Thank you very much. We have the questions here.
I would just add something to following what Yoav said, that maybe it's something that you need to take to the European ambassador here, that we don't know who received the grant and we don't have the way to follow up on that. So maybe there should be a system that we know who won, what's their proposal, and maybe to receive some of the implementation so we can learn from, because otherwise you submitted it, you don't know what happened with it, and that's it.
Transparency is very important, of course.
Actually, they publish it on the website. Once the reviewing process for a specific call is terminated, then they actually publish who won and the contact details, and actually you can follow up with those. Yeah. Okay. So there was a question in the chat. Yael, can I refer to it?
Yes, we are now. You want to
Yeah,
raise
please
it?
go ahead.
Okay, so there was a question where there are regional plans, I think specifically for Israel. To the best of my knowledge, only the Forum 15, the group of independent cities led by Tel Aviv, has some document or policy kind of guidelines for all member cities about resilience plans and adaptation strategies for all those, bad things that can happen due to climate change. But I'm not sure there is a national kind of flooding preparedness plan, because it's different from the northern Israel to central Israel and to the south. Rain typically different. For example, I studied and published a paper on the Tel Aviv flood on January 4th, 2020, the tragedy with the two young people in the elevator in southern Tel Aviv. And one of our scientific conclusions was that it was the storm, that specific storm was exacerbated because of urban pollution. There were high levels of pollution on the day before, and they were ingested into the clouds. And that's what made the storm so ferocious, with a huge amount of water in a very short time that collapsed the drainage system in Tel Aviv. We can expect more such events in the future if we don't, get prepared, change the way the city operates its traffic, maybe switch from gas-based cars to electric vehicles. Like if we take example from Paris, the mayor Anne Hidalgo pronounced, and Yael, I'm sure you know this, that by 2030, petrol-based cars are not allowed into the city of Paris. And I think this was replicated for Copenhagen and for London as well. So my dream is, and Eitan, maybe you should talk to the mayor, that they would say that by 2030 or 2035, whatever, Tel Aviv will not allow buses that are not electrical or cars that are not electrical or something of the sort, which will force, of course, building the necessary infrastructure for electric charging, but also a huge move to rapid transit, public transportation. That's my dream. I hope it will occur.
I hope it will be much quicker than we can see electrifying the vehicles and all the rest of our industrial uses as well, and making it in a clean and sustainable energy. And with this, are there more questions from the crowd, from the people joining us? If not,
but if I can respond a second.
Sure.
I think that you maybe we're not ready to declare everything that you want, but definitely in Tel Aviv, and people that live in Tel Aviv can see it. We changed the pyramid of traffic from this to this, and if you go through the street of Tel Aviv today, people start to think twice and maybe more before they take a car in the city. We expanded the walkways, the bicycle lanes, the public transportation, and while the metro will start, we will increase the number of pedestrian areas that we already started. We have 14 areas that are blocked to cars, and it will increase, and so we're moving to that direction.
In preparing for this event, Sebastian told me that by 2030, Freiheim will reach its maximum capacity for cars. And I don't know the figures in Israel, but I told him that I think we have passed this threshold maybe 10 years ago.
20 years ago.
We are in 140% here.
Yes. Well, thank you very much for our distinguished panelists, and thank you all for participating. I think we have a lot more to discuss, and I really hope that this organization for making better cooperation between Europe and Israel on several issues, but especially the climate change and environmental issues, will make a big step and help NGOs and municipalities and academic institutions to take the leadership and make Israel and Europe collaborate in a much more stronger way, because we really need to take a serious action. This is our life, this is our future. We have to work very, very strongly to make a change.
Thank you very much, Yael. Thank you very
you,
much, our
Alan.
participants. On behalf of the Hans Seidel Foundation and Europe-Israel Network, thank you, guests, for being with us, and we hope very much to contribute in a very practical way to this important cause. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you very much.
Good evening. Thank you. Goodbye. Bye, Yael.